sense of it.
Welcome to the program, Melissa. I'm looking forward to chatting today. It's good to have another Antipodean on the program.
Hi, Simon. It's nice to be here too. Thanks for having me.
Now, I always ask my guests, how did you come to Treasury and what made you choose Treasury as your career?
I think it happened all the way from university. To be fair, I studied in New Zealand at Massey University, did a finance major, and then carried on and finished off my accounting postgraduate. And when I thought about the jobs and where to get going, I started in banking, and that got me really into Treasury. I spent my second half of my time at Westpac in the dealing room and really got used to talking to treasurers, and it was a fun ride from there.
So just for the listeners, you spent your first 10 years rather, with Westpac in New Zealand. You then made the move within New Zealand to Deloitte, so moved over to the consulting side of things, where you've been for the last 21 years. But within that, you've made the move from the New Zealand office into the US office, where your host office is San Francisco, but you've worked across all of the US across those 21 years. What would you say have been the career highlights for you so far in your mind?
Oh goodness, there's been a lot when you count all those years together, Simon. Too many years to be counting at this point. I think there's been a lot of firsts for me. First in terms of setting up a debt capital markets capability for Westpac in New Zealand back in the early 90s, being, I think, the youngest manager at the time ever appointed at Westpac in New Zealand, taking time through the privatization process, where the New Zealand government was selling a lot of assets and starting to work with private equity and do M&A type of work. That was really neat. And then coming over to Deloitte, that was also very different. I went from, thinking about Treasury, really started getting steeped in valuation, capital structure, and advising boards, and that was a lot of fun. And very interesting work. And then, sort of when I transferred over to the US, I think the highlights have really been, taking a practice and growing 150 people in the US in a Deloitte in Treasury, just in the US, building out our global capabilities in Europe and Asia Pac, and really helping the teams around the world mobilize and get going and scale. And then, there's been some tremendous project highlights and working with, fabulous clients over the years and doing some very interesting work, all the way from, broad transformation to fraud work to M&A. It's been wonderful work to do, and really enjoyed it.
Now, Melissa, I'm always, as my listeners know, I'm always a big fan of global citizens, and being a Kiwi, how did you find that transition to the US and San Francisco and more broadly?
Yeah, it was really interesting. So I had 5 years at Deloitte in New Zealand, and then moved to the US. And I'd have to say, when I first got here, I remember thinking to myself, the only thing the same is the name. It was very, very different. So much bigger to compare the two markets. And so, what I found was people were generally deeper and more specialized in the US than they were back in the New Zealand market. And I think from that, actually had an advantage in many respects, because I had a broad base of finance behind me before I arrived. And but different cultures, different expectations, different size of companies that you're working with more specialist teams. It's the markets are definitely different from each other.
And I also find with my business, dealing with the 50 different states in the US is also culturally very different. Have you found that San Francisco is quite different to other states and cities?
Yeah, I have. I find even cities within states to be different from each other. But I also find the industries that I work with can be different. You know, you've got companies with explosive growth, with you know, younger folks doing things that you know, in other industries are more you know, slower growth, and the management teams are generally older, and so there's, you know, sort of a wide spectrum of clients that you find as well that you work with.
How did you find the transition going from banking into the consulting environment? Because they're two very different environments as well, aren't they?
Yeah, you know, they are different, and I like both. I'd have to say, you know, I still regard my time in banking as a real benefit, and I really enjoyed it. I think, you know, what I found was, you know, the skill levels were, you know, both are very competitive and really good. I found people, you know, sort of with slightly different focus. So, you know, some more transactional and others more relationship, or some deeper in certain topics. But I actually really enjoyed it. I think I found, though, that consulting was different without a balance sheet behind you. So, you know, when I was in debt capital markets and I'd go and talk to a customer, I could, you know, do underwriting or something like that, which I couldn't do when I was in consulting. So, you know, there are definitely advantages and disadvantages. On the flip side, I found clients coming to me shortly after I made the transition and, you know, saying to me, look, I like the fact that you know the banking side, but I want to know if this is good for me or for the bank. And so, you know, both perspectives are helpful, and, you know, there's advantages to both.
And I think it's such a good grounding in the consulting space. I didn't give you heads up beforehand, but I'm ex-KPMG. I learnt the ropes there, but I was probably one of the worst auditors ever going around, hence I ended up in recruitment. As my listeners know, I talk about a lot. Also, I guess what I do a lot in my business is networking. What's been your approach to networking, and how have you sort of approached that over your journey?
Yeah, you know, it's a good question. I think I try and stay in touch with companies, because I tend to find that you know, you get the opportunity to meet people and start working with them. And, you know, I give this advice to people that you know, work for me as well. Stay in touch, because, you know, every once in a while they'll need you again. And if you've not nurtured the relationship, it's hard to be there for the next thing that happens. And in Treasury, you know, that next thing might be 2 or 3 years away. You know, treasurers are not prolific buyers unless, you know, there's a lot of transformation going on. So, you know, I've tended to approach it that way. And, you know, I think COVID has added a brand new dimension to how do you network when you don't see people now like you used to. And, you know, I was talking to a client this morning and encouraging them when they said, hey, I can't grab a beer anymore with my colleagues. I said, look, I sometimes have Zooms at 5 or 6 o'clock at night, and we have a glass of wine together. So, you know, it's been you know, quite the change, quite frankly, to go from one to the other.
Yeah, it's one of those. It's interesting because I have the same thing, Melissa, where I really find I miss that face to face. But
Yeah.
the flip side of that is it's made the meeting side of things far more efficient. You know, you can have 8 meetings in a day that there's just no way with travel time you could have made that happen before. So efficiency is there, but, you know, face-to-face contact is definitely something I'm missing.
Yeah, I think the thing is, sometimes things would have been done outside of the meeting, and they're harder to do now because everyone's got a pretty jammed schedule. And you know, there are a lot of advantages to the Zoom meeting and not having to be in 3 different cities in a week. But the flip side is being able to go for a cup of coffee afterwards and chat about the meeting, or what do you want out of that meeting beforehand. The softer side is a little harder, and
Yeah,
you
I
have to be
totally
quite
agree.
deliberate about that.
Yeah. What about mentors? Has that been something that, or have they been a big part of your development over your journey?
Somewhat. You know, I think I have had different mentors at different times in my career, and they have been a good part of my journey. I think the other thing that I've really benefited from is the leadership programs that Deloitte has for, you know, seasoned partners, you know, as part of their succession planning. And and they themselves have offered, wonderful sort of leadership training and development for me. And, the combination of the two has been quite powerful.
You've had a great career so far, as we've just touched on. If you could go back to give yourself some advice as a 25-year-old when you were starting out, what's the key thing that you would like to pass on to the listeners now that you wish you knew back then?
Oh, look, I'm not sure I would do too much different. That's one thing I would say. I think my biggest piece of advice for, early 20s or even early 30s is ground yourself with a wide range of skills in the first 5 to 10 years of your career, and allow that breadth to to provide you with the opportunities of being agile. So, one of the things I say to people is, even as a partner at Deloitte, is every sort of 5 to 6 years, you've got to reinvent yourselves. Something happens in the market. So, right now we're going through a massive digital transformation. We're thinking about things like AI, which we weren't doing significantly 5 years ago, massive moves to the cloud and things like this. And so, that agility is really important for anyone in their career. And so I think it's really important to, lay that foundation reasonably broad at the start of your career, and then continue to be well-read and curious about what's going on in the world. So, rather than just focusing on what you do today, think about the world around you and really how you can position yourselves to be successful, not just now, but in 3 to 5 years, and what that next move might be.
You've obviously grown the business a lot. You mentioned growing it to 150 people in the Deloitte business under yourself. What are the key things that you look for in specifically your direct reports, but also generally hiring into your team?
So agility that I just spoke about, I think agility and intellectual curiosity are really important to me. And I think it's, obviously important as a consultant to be curious, because no two treasury departments are the same. No two companies have identical business models or geographic footprints and things like that. So these things I really look for. I have a long-term motto that I have, and I think I push this down to my team as well, is don't hire jerks. So even if there is someone smarter, if they're not demonstrating good interpersonal skills, I often find that for all the intellect that they can bring and that last little bit of incremental technical capability, if they don't have good people skills, then they can be very disruptive to a team. So I look for temperament and how far I think that they can really, what they can become in 5 to 10 years. I've interviewed people and actually said to them during the interview, I think you could be a partner of the firm. And, I don't say it often, but I can see it, right? Sometimes people walk in and they're just phenomenal, and that they've got the potential to be there. So I'm looking for their growth or growth potential in the way that they're thinking and acting.
So what you're saying there, Melissa, is like, are softer skills more important then, or the subject matter expertise, or it's kind of a 50-50?
I think it's probably more a 50-50, but that agility, which one could argue is a softer skill, you have to have that's why I say you've got to have that foundation right, because where you've had the opportunity, if you're in Treasury, to understand capital structure, the capital markets, cash management, foreign exchange, technology, if you understand all of those and then you've got a good understanding of industry, you can really go anywhere with that.
Yep, totally agree.
Yeah.
You speak to a lot of treasurers in your day-to-day as your clients. What do you think makes a successful treasurer in the eyes of the C-suite?
Oh, that's very easy. It may, and I say that from the perspective of, we think about the CFO and the treasurer and others. We have this concept at Deloitte called the 4 faces of. And so we think about a catalyst being a treasurer that can, think about what is the company's strategies and how can I contribute to those. And a strategist might be thinking even one step ahead about, well, hey, we want to do growth. Let me model out some scenarios and be able to take them to the board so we really understand our capital structure and our capacity and the impacts on our credit rating and where we could go with this around our own financial flexibility. So the treasurers that tend to make the most impact have attributes of catalyst and strategist in their in what they do, where the other four faces of the treasurer in our view are the steward, who looks after the balance sheet, protects the balance sheet, and the operator, which from my perspective is a little bit like the Swiss train system. You can set your watch by the train, not in terms of how efficient it is. So it's great as a treasurer to be really efficient, make sure all the day-to-day gets done, but that's kind of table stakes. So being able to really understand, what are the 1 to 3 things I could do to help the business in terms of either top line growth or operating margin performance. Maybe I could help them on net working capital reductions to free up cash in the balance sheet. Can I help them with pricing in new markets or things like this that really enable the company's strategy? It's those kind of thoughts and actions which really differentiate strong treasurers and ones that are really valued in the organization. And so when I talk to my clients, I ask them about what are their mandates from the CFO, and if they don't know, that's a good opportunity for them to start thinking about what they should be and going and having those conversations. But they really need to fully appreciate the nuanced corporate strategy and how they can be a part of that.
That makes absolute sense. And I think that being a true business partner is the key at the moment, isn't it, from a treasury perspective, and making sure that you're valued and seen.
Absolutely.
How do you see the role of the treasurer changing in the next couple of years? Obviously, technology is moving very rapidly. Is there anything that you see, from how the role will change as a treasurer?
I think in some ways it already has. COVID dramatically impacted treasurers. It varied quite a lot across industries. Many of the tech companies have done very well. If you're in travel and hospitality, it's been a rocky ride this past 12 months. If you were in energy and resources, you've had commodity volatility and all these things going on as well as COVID. So I think there's been a lot of disruption, and that in of itself has forced, change within the organizations for those that, hadn't ever experienced the stress on their financials, a big increase in focus on forecasting, for example, getting that visibility into all of the cash around the world rather than just the important pockets from their perspective before. I think the business partnering and the working capital trend theme has really become very important. Roughly 75% of the treasurers we interview say they rate this as an important part of their role now, where probably 10 years ago that most of them would not have. And as to digital transformation, it's underway. I would think that from everything we've surveyed, it's a little slower on the treasury side than it has been on other parts of finance. And I put some of that down to the relative scale of the treasury teams compared to the rest of the finance organization. But I think these recent sort of finance transformations that are underway have allowed treasury teams that are interested in them to jump into it because the rest of finance is doing it and they can be part of a broader and funded program that they might be doing it across finance. So I think we'll see more data scientists be hired into Treasury, people that are really good statistically and can look at developing AI solutions in Treasury. I expect that to come, but it's certainly not mainstream at this point.
Definitely. Well, Melissa, it's been a pleasure chatting to you. thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to chatting again in the future.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Simon. Enjoyed it.